This was 12. Welcome back, everybody.
Throw it 2 again.
Office hours 12.
12.
1, 2, 10. 12.
When we hit 21, I don't know what we're going to do.
Yeah, we're going to have to hold up like cards or something.
That's a good idea.
Yeah.
Just get random things that are numbered certain ways, just as a, like, athlete jerseys or
Oh, that could be really cool.
for numbers. Yeah.
I like that.
Think about it.
We can hold up dominoes, have people count.
It's true. It's actually a good one. I like that. Just find random, like, numbers. Like, for example, this cup is a knockoff of a
Jack Daniels.
Jack Daniels bottle, but it's got old number 7 brand written in the center. So if for number 7, we could hold up this. Like, we could just find random things that have the number on it.
And people listening strictly on the podcast version are like, shut up, guys. Get to the business.
Yeah, I saw what number it was when I clicked on it.
Idiots.
You idiot. All right, number 12.
Number 12.
Nick, hit me with an immediate takeaway right off the top. Show some love.
Holding both. But before because we're going to riff on that for a while, I
That's
feel like.
probably going to take up the whole episode.
So we talked to Dr. Rachel Brenner, who's a professor of psychology at Colorado State University. She does a lot of research with self-compassion, stigma, discrimination, and she dove into her research and then also dove in a little bit to her own personal experience. And I love the conversation. Like we were saying, this one just really felt like a really solid conversation, to where we could share our own experiences. She should share hers, and it was really cool. So
The thing I think was the most valuable to me looking back on it was a great perspective setting conversation. I think what it did for me was really like allowed me to just really gain some good middle ground perspective on just this idea of holding both, like you mentioned. And I just felt like I came away from it so much more at ease with everything.
right. She is, like I said, she's studying topics like self-compassion and stigma. And these are types of things that get thrown around so much that, like, if you just said it to somebody, you'd assume that they'd probably know what it means. But the way that she talked about it in the episode is she, like, broke down what these definitions are and different components that make up these constructs or these words. And that was so helpful for me. So you asked what my favorite part was. Holding both. For people who haven't listened to the episode, what's holding both, Brendan?
It's the idea that in any moment where you're feeling, happy or sad or need some perspective, it's understanding that you can feel both things at one time, and that's okay. So, for example, it's that idea that on one hand, you're a unique individual and nobody has ever gone through the circumstances that mirror what you've done exactly the same, and that's very isolating. And on the other hand, you're a human being like everybody else, and you share that common humanity, and other people have probably gone through similar things with you, and that's also super like community focused and community building mindset. So it's it's just understanding that both of those things are true. And there's a peace and an understanding and a happiness and a sadness in all of that. And that's okay, but you can't not have one side. We were just talking about it, and it's kind of like a scale, right? Like if you only are holding one, you may be a little bit off balance, and that could come up in many ways. So.
Yeah. Like balance is the key to life pretty much. And it's just necessity. Like in clinical work or struggling with emotions, like you see that there's too much of one. Sometimes it's even too much positive emotion or too much high energy, and then not enough of actual like a come down or a realization of like, man, maybe I'm manic, and also maybe I'm super depressed, and trying to find the balance of, okay, I feel sad feelings, okay, I also feel good feelings, like this is normal. It's it's beautiful because
Yeah.
I don't think I ever talked about it as holding both. I've always talked about it as a balance, but I think that's a very general word for the whole thing. Like
Right.
holding both is
balance is almost a buzzword, right?
Yeah.
Like you say it, but like, what are you really saying? But holding both, specifically, maybe in the context of our conversation, holding both emotions at the same time is a good, better way of describing the term balance without having to just say balance. Because I think that just gets lost on people.
Yeah, because it validates both sides,
Right.
with holding both, which is awesome.
And in a circumstance, for example, where somebody may be feeling upset as a, somebody looking to care for somebody else by presenting a hold both, way of consoling somebody who's maybe in a bad place or helping somebody not get too high on their own supply, you're providing validation for what they are feeling, but you're also providing perspective on the side that they're not feeling. And so it can be a very good technique for like just communicating with people, right? Like if you were feeling down about something, I could be like, it would be both validating and hopefully through feeling equally validated, you're also being able to like gain the perspective of the opposition of where you're feeling and really like see clearly and move through whatever you're experiencing.
Yeah, and I thought that she just does so well in tying all of this into her research, like with self-compassion. She doesn't just say like you need to be self-compassionate and that's it. She said specifically that you can be self-critical and self-compassionate, and there's a strength to both. It's like a healthy anxiety or a healthy stress to motivate you, and also like you need to take care of yourself and appreciate yourself. So were there any other topics that you really found super interesting?
I mean, I just really enjoyed the whole conversation. Like we said, I felt like we came back to this holding both topic a lot, but I mean, I did really also enjoy the self-kindness, self-compassion stuff because it's just so present right now. I think in a quarantined world, there's a lot of things to be anxious about, and there's a lot of things to beat yourself up about, from the worst of the worst of like, giving, like maybe being the person in your family who like got COVID, right? Like that's stressful.
Yeah.
But at the same time, we are living in such like a crazy world that we also need to have the ability to like forgive others and forgive ourselves for being that person if that was the case, because there's no way we could have foreseen what was going to happen, and we couldn't have, nobody did it on purpose. And I think just that overall trend of like forgiving ourselves and other people a lot more is like desperately needed in today's day and age. That I really like the tone of just like being understanding and showing forgiveness and towards yourself and others. I think there was just a great positive, we held both throughout the conversation. We had a positive tone while being receptive to the negative that exists in the moments. And I think I just felt very good in that whole interview. I think it was just a good vibe.
Yeah. Yeah, and it was just super helpful for me. I know I mentioned this in the actual episode, but like when she talked about how like she feels grateful for her situation during COVID and during quarantine, and at the same time she's like, I'm not doing the best, or I haven't been doing my best, and it's confusing. And when I heard the word confusing, I was like, man, like that is spot on. Like that is what I have been feeling a lot of this time too, because I'm extremely grateful for where I'm at right now. And thankfully I'm like still able to work and go to school. And at the same time, like it's been really tough. And that confusion is like that in between piece of like holding both. And it takes me back and forth. But her just like naming that along with holding both, that like you can be grateful right now and you can also feel like not so good feelings because it's normal and it's part of this process. So I just really appreciated like naming all these different things, acknowledging these things, because if we don't, like they're just going to kind of hang around.
Yeah. And I love that as part of that, we tied in so perfectly the idea of like what a meditative practice can provide to people who maybe need help like coming back into that center when you're trying to hold both and one side maybe seems to be a little heavier, to bring yourself back down, and really just like allowing yourself to maybe strip away some of the anxieties. And like you mentioned, at times maybe people are like riding a high a little bit too much and need to just like gain some perspective on, you know, not that there's anything wrong with like being overly like uppity up, but you know, there's a lot of probably fluctuations in energy that come with that. If you're crashing really bad too, as a result of that, then that's not a good thing either. So just in general, I think, you know, I would endorse the practice of any kind of meditative practice at all. I think people probably get a certain, you know, if people are really tapping into it in like religious ceremony, like if they go to church or if they go to whatever type of spiritual practice they do on a religious standpoint, I think they may get a certain bit of that there. But I mean, even just like pausing for deep breathing can just be so centering. If like you have a very clear intention of like, I am going to take the next however long to just do nothing. And it's going to be the appreciation of the fact that right now nothing is happening. I think it goes a much longer way towards stress management than people realize. And in a world where stress is probably one of the leading, you know, causes of a lot of health ailments out there, like people who are just like overloading themselves with stress, disrupting their sleep, hormone imbalances, and then, you know, if you're not eating right, then like stress can be an unbelievable catalyst for so many negative things. That I think doing a little meditation, even if it's just like, it can be as basic as sit in your backyard, on a patio, on your front porch, whatever it is, for 5 minutes, leave your phone inside and just like close your eyes with a cup of coffee and just take 14 deep breaths. I think I've even used that number before on one of our office hours, but like just sitting there taking 14 deep breaths really slow and just thinking about each breath is extremely calming. And I think that it would go a long way for people to try and incorporate one time a week doing something like that.
Even just one breath, you can feel it in your body.
Yeah.
If you're really conscious of it.
Yeah, for sure.
It's nuts. And I don't do it.
Oh, not nearly enough. I try and do it when I feel myself needing it. Like if I'm just in the middle of the day, one of the great benefits of being employed by a healthcare company is that they've partnered with Calm. So I get a year of Calm for free as part of my
Look at that.
perks. But it's cool because if I'm feeling like they have 5-minute breathing things on there and I can just pop one open. If I'm feeling like, dang, I got so much to get done and like this is stressing me out, I can just open that baby up. Just get some good deep breaths in. And I'm not trying to say it fixes everything, right? Like that, I don't want to be clear about that too. It's not like just some catch-all, but like at least recenter yourself to be like, okay, what do I have to do next? Let's start doing it. Yeah, and it's crazy too how much research there's been and how little this has been talked about, but there's like a direct correlation between like your breathing technique and your breathing style and your nervous system. And like you can control parts of your nervous system by like controlling your breath. Like that's what like a hyperventilation is.
Oh, right.
Right? Like
Yeah.
that's a internally triggered response. So like your body will trigger your breathing sometimes, but you can also use your breathing to trigger your nervous system. And people like Wim Hof, or there's another guy with a book called Breathe who like he's a journalist. He did a lot of really in-depth research about like all the different people out there who use breathing techniques, like indigenous cultures who use breathing techniques, and like people who are doing crazy things with their breath. So yeah, I think people just need to like look at the breath work as like a very important practice to utilize in daily life too.
Right. Like one of the treatments for like panic attacks is like going through it with the person themselves, hyperventilating and then coming back to a space to where you can relax.
So you're saying if I was hyperventilating, you would hyperventilate on purpose for me to then guide me back down from my hyperventilation.
Right. Because that's what's going to occur in those moments. And so if you can expose them to it in a safe place to where they understand that, like, okay, this is what I'm feeling now. Maybe I can start to calm myself down a little bit. Then that's one of the treatments.
Is there like you doing that? Do I pick up on that like in a rhythmic sense? Like, and I can start hearing your breathing and it translates to my breathing?
Yeah. So I've never done this and I'm not recommending this to anybody. Like if this is something
don't go doing it without research, but
or with a professional, because this is something that you do with somebody. So in my training, like I saw a video of somebody doing this with a client. Thankfully this was like a client agreed to do it on stage with somebody. And so they were able to
controlled setting, all that.
Yeah. It was really cool. And they gently kind of like walk the person through, like, what do you experience when you experience a panic attack? Got some information. And then they also walk them through, okay, we're going to start to hyperventilate a little bit, start to take a lot of breaths. I don't know the exact process specifically, because then they would like stand up and you'd feel like really lightheaded and almost like blacking out a little bit. And then you'd sit back down and they'd take them through the process of calming the body down, really slowing it down. And then it helps them realize that, okay, in this heightened state, I'm still okay.
There's still some control there.
I'm still alive. Yeah. Because it feels like you're going to die, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, it's part of like exposure therapy pretty much.
Got it. Interesting.
Yeah, it's cool. Really cool. But yes, I'm not saying do this at home.
This is not advice for people to go do.
No, this
is information for people to listen to and then ask a healthcare professional.
Yes, an actual professional if you wanted to do this. But yeah, it's really interesting how just like breath is what we need.
Yeah.
Like in all circumstances. In a lot of my training in general with people who are psychologists, like it always comes back to either if the client's in a crisis or something just happened and they're freaking out a little bit, like bring them back to their breath. And then even some people who have trained me have said, even if you yourself, like if you are starting to feel dysregulated in session based on something that's going on, like you need to bring yourself back to your breath, take deep breaths, relax, and then kind of just let whatever come to you.
That's interesting though, because is that a typical like strategy that people that clinicians employ to get, like, I can just imagine that there's some people who are not going to respond well to being told, like,
oh yeah, definitely.
Right. So for those types of people, I'm curious, like what, like you've got to do this. Do you know what the alternative practice is to like, instead of being some like, you have to bring yourself back in, like, that's like, I agree that everybody should have the capacity to do so, but how do you get somebody to the point where they can?
Right. And so I'm not an expert on this. I'm still a trainee. But just from my knowledge right now, you have to do these things when people are feeling okay. So you have to start practicing these things when people are regulated. They're in a good, stable mood for the most part. And you tell them, like, this is something that we need to keep doing. You need to keep practicing. Like, I'm not
like a muscle memory kind of a thing. So that when it happens, you are like maybe a little bit more aware that you have the skills to control this situation.
Yes.
Interesting.
Yeah. So it's a lot of like providing people with the skills to manage these things. But in the moment, like,
and I feel like too, like the presentation of that, like, recommendation of like, you have to bring yourself into control here. Like it can be presented in a way that's like empowering, and that's probably the way it needs to be done, right? Because it can't be like an anxiety ridden, like you have to do this. And then the person puts pressure on themselves to do it. It's like, you're there with them and we're going to get you to overcome this.
Yeah. It's more like you can do this. Right?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's cool. I guess I never had thought about like, to tie back into like this positive self-talk and like self-kindness thing, right? Like there's no more powerful tool than to like be able to like take control over that stuff for yourself, right? So I think practicing those techniques to get yourself back to a state of calmness and reduce stress and whatever that is a hugely important like tool for even people who would not say they suffer from anxiety, right? Because there's going to be situations where they are going to have like a riled up heart rate, like a driving situation where they're in an accident, or, you know, anybody can experience, you know, the symptoms of anxiety at some point due to who knows what could happen. And like, you know, in a way we owe it to ourselves to be able to have that control to bring ourselves back down to like a good state so that we can be at our best. I think that's a big piece of the self-kindness continuum.
Right. And just talking about that, I think about like any kind of de-escalation and like de-escalation training, like people who are tending to crises, like police officers or fire department
EMS
people. Yeah, like all these different types of professions. So they have these trainings. I don't know what they entail. I've never worked in that profession. But I think that there's just such a piece to not only being able to like de-escalate a situation, but then also to like processing what happened and what came up for you. And I wonder how much of that actually occurs. Like if it does just happen and then you kind of go home with that stuff. Like if I was a firefighter, like you're doing so many different things, and or even a police officer or somebody, like in these moments, you're going through all these crisis situations, sometimes not all the time, but when they do come up, like, I wonder what that process is like. Like, how much of it does get processed, how much of it just gets kind of thrown to the side, and then how much of it gets resurfaced. I know it's different for people, but...
Yeah. Well, I think, shift work especially, right? Because when we talk about, you know, managing stress levels and, like, the hardships of the job, you know, when your sleep is irregulated and you're going through high stress environments all day, like talk about being able to manage stress, get good quality sleep, self-kindness, all this other stuff. Like we ask so much of those people who are in those professions to do that stuff that, like that's got to be an incredibly difficult process to go through, because I even think about it from a standpoint of like, if that was me and you were my, you know, psychologist and I had just gone through a traumatic event and we were like processing this, I don't even know if I'm my best self if I'm not fully rested when I come in to have this meeting.
For real. Yeah.
And like, so how am I even setting myself back a step by not being 100% in the room first, which is crazy. And I even think that something that probably is diagnosed, for lack of a better term, is the fact that there's a lot of people who are dealing probably with very similar symptoms over what they didn't do. You know, because one thing, when I had my brief stint going through some EMT training here in California, one of the things that they teach you is that don't make somebody else's emergency your emergency too. So don't go running in to a situation, car accident, whatever, without assessing the danger that is currently active in that situation. So, you know, what comes right along with that is the fact that you may not act right away, and then something may happen that you didn't tend to, that you were like, damn, had I just ran in there, I could have helped and gotten that person out. I'm just going to use the example of like turned over car, gas leaking, there's a fire, explosion situation. Like, had you just gone in and pulled that person out, you probably could have saved them, but you didn't. And it's that what I did not act on caused the damage. And but you wouldn't get necessarily taken into a psychologist because of what you didn't do.
No.
But you may be beating yourself up because of what you didn't do.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's crazy what goes on in the first responder world.
Yeah. Yeah, same thing with like medical doctors or anybody in like the healthcare setting too. Like these people are working crazy shifts and doing crazy things and like losing lives of their patients, like, and then has to go to work the next day and care for somebody else, or just traumatic events in general. Like people who experience these things. I mean, it's prevalent today as to why there's like so many different problems and people really struggle with a lot of different things, because I really don't think that there's support for processing certain things that people experience. And it's hard.
Yeah. You know what? Something I was thinking about, and I'm kind of bummed we didn't bring it up with Dr. Bren, but something that I would be curious to hear her give a little like hot take on is what she perceives as being a potential like benefit to like having a stable community. And we've talked about this a lot with a lot of other professors, but something that really got me thinking lately is so I listened to a guy who does a podcast called Fundamental Health. His name's Paul Saladino, and he's kind of on this like, you know, carnivore side of the equation, but he's a doctor and he doesn't eat actually strict carnivore. He eats a lot. He eats carbs. He doesn't like keep it out, but he eats nose to tail and he eats every piece of the animal because he thinks it's the most nutritious. That's not the point of my comment. Anyway, he just went and spent like a week with, there's like 4 or 5 groups of people who are still true hunter-gatherers today. And there's one of them in Africa called the Hadza. And he went and he lived with them for a week. And he wanted to like observe their diet and their lifestyle and all this stuff. And this really got me thinking about the idea of like the benefit of a community of people who you've lived with your entire life, right? We have people coming in and out of our lives on a daily basis that we, for, you know, all things considered, we do not care about these people. Like, we have respect for them as human beings, obviously, but it's not your mother or your father.
Yeah.
You know, it's not your aunt or your uncle. You have a different relationship with that type of a community, but we are such, at least currently in our evolution, we're such developmentally predisposed to living in like really tight-knit communities. You hunt together, you eat together, you feast and famine together, you suffer loss of your community together. And I think it's like interesting how little community, like true tight-knit, like imagine if you lived in a small village with the same 100 people. Like every person in that village you would have like a serious deep connection with, right?
It's like being on a sports team, right?
It is. Like, I think that's the closest thing we come to like in modern society. Or maybe like if you've got a really close-knit like work family, I'm sure there's some companies out there that do a really good job with that. Mm-hmm. But he was talking about this idea that like, you know, if something bad happened on a daily basis, right? And like, we've got obviously like a depression and anxiety, you know, running rampant through society. And like a lot of people aren't really understanding how to cope and deal with it. But he said that like in situations like that, people were like, okay, this is what was communicated to him from these people in this tribe. They were like, they've got 2 days to get over it. And then like, we got to get back to life. Like we have to go do all this other stuff. And I'm curious how like the role of a tighter community, like more of that like real tribe, like mindset changes the psychology of dealing with grief like that. You know what I mean?
Right.
And I think we're like so far in our like I could have passed by 100,000 people today. You know, I don't know any of them, right? Like driving, and if the minute you step into a store, there's 200 people in there. Like by the time you go in and out and all the workers and everything at the gas station, picking up food, all of this stuff. So I'm just curious if we're like much further off from community as we realize, and like the value that a community brings when it comes to like processing grief and like a situation like that where like you didn't do something if you're a first responder. Like I just think we're not appreciating the gravity of a strong community as much as maybe we should. Is a very interesting thought that I was having while listening to this podcast episode. But I wish we could have asked Dr. Bren that, like what role community plays in this negative self-talk or this positivity. Like, do we need large groups of people who are looking out for our best interests to like boost us up, tell us good things, tell us where we're bad at stuff, tell us where we're good at stuff, and help and mentor us to get better? Like, everybody's got a vested interest in everybody performing at their absolute best.
No person left behind.
No person left behind. Right. Like the military is probably a great example of this, and probably a reason why a lot of people like have like separation anxiety from the military when they leave. Like they don't know what to do.
Yeah.
I think that's pretty common too. So yeah, it's just something that I think a lot about, and I don't think it's something that we can really achieve with our modern society. So I don't know. What do you think about that?
No, I there's such a value in it. And like I lived in an apartment building 3 years ago, and for a full year, and I knew my 2 roommates and then one neighbor. And the only reason I knew one of the neighbors is because it was somebody that one of my roommates knew. And like there were 10 different apartments within that same complex. And it's like I knew nobody, and that's normal, right? Like you don't know your neighbors anymore. Mm-hmm. And if you do, like maybe it's like the older couple who's super nice and friendly.
Yeah.
Right. Or maybe it's like your friend that you know well.
Yeah. And developmentally or like evolutionarily, maybe that is triggering some kind of, you're surrounded by 10 rooms full of potential threats.
Yes. And right? I think that's what more so like we've turned to. Like in my family's experience, my family always talks about how like growing up was so different. Like people left their doors open. It was just
it's like Canada.
Yeah, like you could just go. Like people would help each other out, and I'm speaking from my own bias of living in this one area in Bay Area of California. But like, yeah, what people say that social media can like promote connection, but I'm curious about just like with this increase in feeling connected through online, like is it just really decreasing that general sense of like connecting with somebody like in a community setting, like having a friendly neighbor or having people that look out for you within where you live?
Yeah.
You know, because yeah, I can go to work, I can feel supported, but I know that those aren't going to be people that I see all the time outside, you know?
Right. It's not the same vested interest and accountability as somebody who, you know, they need you for something and you need them for something. And so like you have to live up to that edge of the bargain, or like, I mean, I'm sure there are circumstances in like, and there's no doubt like ancient civilizations or whatever, like they cast people out who wouldn't pull their weight or who wouldn't participate. But yeah, it's just a different type of relationship and level of accountability there.
And one of the main things that gets identified is when people experience problems and they get severe is that they feel isolated, right? And so like when you feel alone in these problems and you don't feel supported, that's when they start to feel the most extreme. And if you can share that with somebody, or somebody says, yeah, I feel similar, or you can get out of this, like I'm going to support you through this, it's going to be way different. Like you might still feel isolated to an extent, but it's not going to be the same.
Yeah.
So community.
It's crazy, man.
Are we gonna like build our own community, or does that sound kind of cultish?
You know, in a weird way, I think that's the one. As delusional as a cult is, there is a reason why they get people into them.
Yeah,
it's for all of the reasons we just said. They're just built on a delusion or some kind of like false statement or false deity or whatever they like build themselves upon. But there's a reason they get people, and people are so die hard for like their causes. Right. Like,
yeah. So
what we're saying is cults are good until they're bad.
Surprise. Brenner and I bought this piece of land. Everybody meet there.
We're going to build a church on top of it.
Oh my God. Jeez.
We're not doing that, by the way, people.
We're not. Please. But that's interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thinking about cults that way, because that's very true.
Yeah. And I think, yeah, just to, I mean, bring it back, I think a lot of what we talked about with Dr. Bren was very much so in line with what a good, solid community stands for. I think she would, you know, I'm not going to put words in her mouth totally, but I think she would advocate for like strong community as being like crucial for, you know, having good, positive self-kindness and like, a healthy community, obviously. You know, it has to be, you know, probably meet some criteria, but
yeah. I think that this even applies to what she was talking about and how people struggle with navigating grad school, and how she specifically touched to that. Like people going to grad school, not everybody, but often are going alone, living in a different area, probably living in some apartment, and then having to do all this work. And if they're struggling and not feeling supported, like they're isolated. They don't
start with a lot of rejection.
Yeah.
Yeah.
a lot of stigma and a lot of internalizing, and then it's tough, to say the least. But yeah, so many great takeaways. If you haven't listened, and you're curious about like what we just talked about, highly recommend this episode. I think it's just helpful to hear. And yeah, we really do hope that it was helpful if you have already listened. So,
and we have a lot of people who continue to listen to the podcast in the audio format, which is great. And that's, I think, our favorite format to listen to also. Mm-hmm. I think it would be an absolute treat if somebody's on their second or maybe third episode listening and they haven't subscribed yet. If they would subscribe, that would absolutely mean the world to us.
Also, I think we have one review on Apple Podcasts, and that's great. I love that.
I would love to see that too.
But yeah, who's going to be the next one?
You know, who's going to take that 5 seconds to just hit that yes on the write a review, or when they're in that podcast app, just like hit that those little purple words.
Just do it.
And just type, click that 5 stars and just be like, wow, Nick is unbelievable and Brendan's a sus bucket.
You know what? If I have to make a second account and go write it myself, I will, but I don't want to have to do that. You know, I don't want to carry that shame. So please.
So what you're saying is if we're really creating a solid community, they wouldn't let you carry that shame, and they would help carry that shame with you.
Please. Support me, community.
I love it.
So thanks for tuning in to Office Hours 12. And stay tuned for a pretty good episode again next week. Next week again, part 2 of Dr. Aaron Belkin.
Oh, just going to put it out there like that.
Just going to say that.
He sent it.
All right. See you, everybody.
Later.